this week. You know, this is one of those weeks where there are so many stories, almost anyone could be the top story that we talk about. So we have a lot to get into. So we weren't able to do the live show last week. So that means we're just going to pack just about more stuff into this show because we didn't have one last week. Again, my name is Daniel. Please go ahead and follow us over at Cops and Cons TV. Make sure that you subscribe to the channel, share it with your friends and family. Just want to welcome everyone in today. Let's see where everyone's from. We've got Sergeant George, good to see you, is in from California. Officer Blue Gun is here from Oregon, and we've got Sonia Salinas is in from Odessa, Texas. Awesome. We've got other Texas people here today, and Sergeant George says, what a way to start the Easter season. Bruce says, what's up, guys? I missed a few shows. Glad to see you here. Yeah, we're glad to see you as well, Bruce. Well, there's been a lot going on in the police world, and as you know, I'm going to go through some of the most important and just interesting stories that have happened really over the last 2 weeks. And there's been, as everyone I'm sure follows this, even when you don't watch Cops and Cons TV, that there has just been so much going on in the world of policing and law and news, and some of these stories that really just affect not just the world of policing, but culture and politics in general. So we're just going to get right into it. The first case I'm going to talk about, and I know this is from a couple weeks ago, but we haven't covered it on the show, so I am just going to give some of my main thoughts on the Nashville shooting case, the Covenant School shooting case. So, and again, just like always, as I'm going through these cases, please make sure that you put any comments or questions in the comments. And one of the things I like is to go back and forth because, you know, we do have a lot of people who watch the show and interact who do have a lot of knowledge and experience as well. And just being able to talk about this as we're going through, I really enjoy the interaction there. So, first case we're going to talk about is the Nashville Covenant School shooting. So everyone knows what happened with that. The body camera footage is out. But, you know, in short, this was in Nashville, Tennessee. There was a call for service at the Covenant School in Nashville. It is a private Christian school of someone who was shooting inside of the school. The individual who was firing was actually inside the school for about 14 minutes before they were killed by police officers. Now, the body camera footage on this is actually really great because this is essentially the ideal response to an active shooter, especially an active shooter inside of a school. Some of the body camera footage, it basically shows the police officers that once they get the call for service, that, you know, they're at the school within, I think, 3 or 4 minutes. Upon getting on scene, then it's only another 3 minutes or so before they actually encounter the offender. And, you know, one of the things about this is that, you know, the body camera footage essentially shows as soon as officers get on scene, they get a group of 4 or 5 of them. They all get there about the same time. So there really isn't any lag time, and they rush into the school. They first start to clear the bottom floor of the school because they're not sure exactly where the shooter is. And then they do hear some gunfire coming from the second floor. It's at that point almost immediately they do the right thing. They abandon the first floor that they had been clearing and going through classrooms, not knowing if they're going into an ambush at any point until they start to hear the gunfire on the second floor. Once they get to the second floor, they essentially follow the gunfire. They go to the gunfire, which is exactly what the police officers are supposed to do in a situation like this. And just luckily for them, at the moment that they do encounter the person who has the firearms and has killed people, they are in the process of reloading. Police officers kill that monster really quickly, which is the absolute right thing to do. One of the things that she was doing, the shooter was doing, is, you know, it's unknown at this point if she knew that police officers were actually in the building, because she was standing kind of at the front of the school in front of a big window, and as other police officers were arriving on scene, she was shooting out the window at arriving police cars. So again, it's unknown if she knew that police officers were already in the building or if she thought that and those were the first responding police officers. But either way, luckily for everyone, we never have to ask her because she is dead. And I want to just talk about a couple different things. So my main takeaways, I got like just about 4 main takeaways from this case. So the first main takeaway, that because, you know, as soon as this happens, almost immediately people like a reflex go into their political corners and they try to make this about things that it shouldn't be, at least right away. Within a couple minutes or a couple hours of the shooting, President Biden, he gave a speech. speech talking about the assault weapons bans. And, it just isn't the time for that right away. There's a time for a policy discussion, but it's not right away. So, and he did call for a ban on the assault weapons, or for Congress to pass his assault weapons ban, after he made jokes about how much he likes to eat ice cream. It was really strange and just absolutely creepy. But some of the main takeaways are, the first thing is that 6 people died at the hands of a violent maniac. So three students who were all 9 years old, and then 3 individuals who worked at the school. I mean, that's the most important thing here, is that 6 lives were lost. They were killed by an absolute maniac. And that murderer deserves zero sympathy. So there's been a lot going on about, what kind of trauma was this person facing. That doesn't matter. No one should care. There should be zero sympathy to the murderer who did this. Also, the school had an emergency plan. So unlike the Uvalde school, and we're going to get to that in a second, some of the comparisons to that school shooting, it's that the school had a plan. So as soon as this started to happen, the kids were evacuated almost immediately and quickly, because unlike the Uvalde school shooting, where there were still a whole bunch of kids in the classroom, and obviously the Uvalde school shooting, the response from police was problematic. I've probably said that more than I've said anything else on this live show, but in Uvalde, it took a long time to evacuate kids once the shooting started. That wasn't the case here. They got these kids most of these kids, they got them out of the school unbelievably quickly. So there was a plan from the administrators. They had police officers come in and talk about them what to do if there is an active shooter. So they had taken that extra step, and that extra step absolutely helped what happened there. Also, police officers risked their lives by entering the school. They were tactic. They were courageous. And because at any point, they didn't know exactly where the shooter was until they started to hear the gunfire. So it could have been an ambush at any minute. And the police officers didn't hesitate. So there are a lot of situations where police officers do hesitate. This wasn't one of them. This was, again, probably the ideal police response to a shooting like this. Now, I'm going to say that even though this was an ideal response from police, there was still a 14-minute time delay. There was a 14-minute time delay from when the individual went into the school. And listen, here's how she entered the school. So we talk about, what can schools do and to make themselves not soft targets, but hard targets. So some of the policy ideas out there are, having an armed guard at every school, having cameras, having alarms, making sure that you lock all doors, not like in Uvalde where a door was kind of propped open or left open, or, the door didn't lock for some reason. So in this case, the doors to the school were locked. However, the doors to the school were glass. So the way that she was able to get into the school is she used her firearm and she shot through the glass and was able to get into the school. So, in covering a lot of these cases, that's actually one thing I've never talked about. I don't think I've ever heard any experts really talk about that, hey, maybe the doors to the school shouldn't be glass. So I think that is something that schools going forward should possibly look at, because that is shooting out that glass is how she gained entry into the school, because the door was locked. Also, just like I said, it almost immediately it became, we have to ban assault weapons. Now, let's just talk about assault weapons really quick, because that involves police officers. That involves, really about how a lot of these things happen. So the ban on assault weapons. So again, if you think I'm wrong on anything I'm about to say, or you have a different opinion, definitely put it in the chat, because I'm curious to see what your opinions are on this. So when it comes to assault weapons, now there's a debate on whether the term assault weapon is even a real thing. What is an assault weapon? Because AR doesn't stand for assault rifle. It stands for Armalite rifle. So so the term assault weapon is, really kind of a made up term. I actually put that in a blog post I did last week, and someone corrected me that it's not a made up term. So either way, in the parlance of our times, people use the term assault rifle to describe AR type weapons. So that's the term I'm going to use, but I know that it's not a real term, and that even when you ask people, if you ask Joe Biden what an assault weapon is, he wouldn't have any idea. I think that's pretty clear. So when it comes to assault weapons, let's talk about that. So there are approximately 20,000 gun homicides in the United States. This is including shootings that are also, maybe it's justified, maybe it's self-defense, but there are approximately 20,000 individuals who are killed by guns every year in the United States, not counting suicides. People who are shot and killed by AR type assault weapon rifles is about 500 a year. That's 3%. Okay, that's actually 6 times less than how many people die in in accidents with swimming pools. So we're talking about 500 people a year, or 3% of all gun deaths. So the idea, so even if you did away with all of the individuals who were killed by assault weapons, you would still have 97%. You would still have 97% of all of the gun homicides still occurring. And then here's what I'm going to ask. Let's say, and we got a couple different issues here, but even if you did away with all of the assault weapons, what would happen is that you would still have those individuals who are trying to kill people, who want to kill people. They want to go into a school or a crowded place and kill people. So now take away the assault weapon. Does that mean that those homicides aren't going to happen, or are those individuals just going to use other guns? Now, could they cause as much damage with other guns? Maybe not. So maybe instead of 500 people being killed a year, maybe it's only 400 people being killed a year. So you see where I'm going with this? That it's any type of a ban on assault weapons. It really doesn't fix the problem. It's a small part of the problem. And I'm going to explain it to you this way. So this individual went into the school. She had two rifles. I'm not sure exactly what type of rifles, but two AR type assault, what people would call assault weapon type rifles, and a handgun. And she had 14 minutes inside the school before police got there. And again, this isn't the fault of police. As soon as the call came in, it was dispatched. They got there within a few minutes. They geared up and they went right in. So it was a great police response, but still this maniac had 14 minutes inside the school by herself with no armed opposition. So here's my question. So let's say instead of the two assault weapon type weapons rifles that she had, let's say she had a backpack full of handguns, or one handgun with just a bunch of different magazines. Could she have killed 6 people in 14 minutes if there were no AR-15s? If there was no AR type rifle that's never been introduced in this country, could she have killed 6 people just like she did in 14 minutes? The answer is of course. So literally, if there were no assault weapons, she could have done just as much damage with any other type of weapon. So the idea that if you say, okay, we're going to point to this policy provision, this would have fixed it, saying that because there was an AR, that's why this happened, that's absolutely ridiculous. It just doesn't make any sense. Please go ahead and put into the comments if you think I'm right or if you think I'm wrong about that. Also, we're going to go one step further. Let's say they do an assault weapons ban, okay? They do an assault weapons ban, and that means that they're not going to manufacture or, sell any more, assault weapon type firearms. Okay, fine. Well, the estimate from the NRA is that, and to me this seems low, but again, we don't really have any idea, but the estimate from the NRA is that there are somewhere between 20 to 25 million AR type rifles in the United States right now. I've seen other estimates that say there's about 100 million AR type rifles. Again, we don't know, but at least the numbers from the NRA is somewhere between 20 to 25 million AR rifles. Again, that's probably on the low end. So on the low end, if we stopped manufacturing and selling new AR type style weapons, we still have at least 20 million of these in the country. So there's no way to get rid of the 20 million weapons. And I guess this is what I say all the time. If you have people who are going to violate the murder law, they're probably not going to follow our gun laws either. So those are some of my opinions on that. Also, this is different from Uvalde. So again, I don't want this to be taken the wrong way. The entire response when it comes to Uvalde was problematic. It was absolutely insane. I've probably covered that case and said something to that effect more than I've said anything else on this live show about how problematic that police response was. But it is not, and the police response in Nashville is pretty much an ideal response. But the two are a little bit different, and here's how they're different. So I would say that what happens if we switch the two? So in the Nashville shooting, police officers were able to, when they came upon the offender, she was kind of out in the open in the process of reloading, and they were able to end the threat quickly, which is absolutely what they should have done, and it was great. In Uvalde, the killer, the murderer, was holed up, barricaded inside of a classroom with possible child hostages. So those two situations, just on their face, they're absolutely different. Now, my guess is if you would have put the Uvalde situation into Nashville, meaning that, if the Nashville police officers had gotten there and they had, and they had the offender inside of a classroom with child hostages. We're not exactly sure how that would have gone. I think it's safe to say they would have ended the situation faster than 77 minutes like Uvalde did, but the situations aren't exactly the same. And I guess what I'm saying with this is that, police officers need to train, they need to be prepared for both situations. They need to look at, okay, what happened in Nashville? This is what happened in Nashville. You had a shooter who was walking around the school. They weren't barricaded, and they were actually out in the open, and police confronted the individual and killed her almost immediately. That was great. Now we have the situation in Uvalde where when the police get there, the shooter is holed up, barricaded inside of a classroom with possible child hostages. So how you deal with those situations, at least police officers have to be aware. They can't, I think it's too simple to just say, look at what the Nashville cops did, and we need to replicate that every single time there's a school shooting, because it's probably not going to happen. I'm just going to tell you now. This is literally the ideal way that we want police officers to handle a shooting, a situation like this. And I'm just going to say that. But what this did is that there are so many anti-police activists who say that police are not necessary and police are useless, and then they point to Uvalde. Well, you know what? There is no more pointing to Uvalde without also pointing to Nashville. And the last thing that I want to say on this before I take questions is no one calls a social worker to kill a monster. All right, let's see what we got here. So Officer Blue Gun, the worst mass casualty events in the country involved a U-Haul with fertilizer and airplanes. Yeah, Officer Blue Gun, that's a really good point. Let's also say that Daryl Brooks in Waukesha, Wisconsin, Daryl Brooks, that maniac, he was able to kill and injure, I think he killed 20-something people. He injured 60 people by driving his SUV through a Christmas parade. So yes, people do not need AR-15s in order to cause a lot of damage. Let's see, the Maxo, banning guns nowadays wouldn't do much, but a stricter distribution of ammunition and qualification restrictions for any gun owner might do the trick, at least for the non-black market guns. The Maxo, that reminds me, can't remember if it was Chris Rock, God, this is probably from like 20 years ago, where he did a bit saying that, gun control is bullshit. He said, we don't need gun control, we need bullet control. He's like, if every bullet costs $5,000, to be like, they put $80,000 worth of bullet into this guy. He must have done something. So yeah, bullet control. That's an interesting idea. Jesse says, always be prepared. Not waiting for a radio you're supposed to already have. Yeah, I think that's a problem in Uvalde, just the communication, not having the radio. The Maxo, there are illegal guns, which pretty much will always exist no matter what you do. Agree. Let's see, Sergeant George, to the students who think getting rid of police officers from school grounds is a good idea, maybe this will change your mind and make you think of how important it is to have them around. Sergeant George, that's such a good point, because again, a situation like, listen, I don't want kids to go to school in like a militarized place where they have where it feels more like a prison than a school. That's not the goal. No one wants that. But what I'm saying is I think the same thing that Sergeant George is saying is that when a situation like this occurs, the only way it's going to end is to when individuals with guns come and confront the person who's doing the killing. Literally the only way that something like this ends. So is a police officer at the front of a school or on the campus, are they going to stop every single school shooting? Well, no, of course not. But can they be there quicker? Can the response, can an armed person who is going to give some type of opposition and resistance to the maniac, having that close by, is that a good idea? I just don't see how anyone can say that's a bad idea. But this is the problem. You have people who are anti-police activists, and what their goal is to abolish police. That's what they want. They want to abolish all police. So even though what I'm saying is reasonable, what Sergeant George, what a lot of people in the chat are saying, this is a reasonable thing to do in order to protect our kids, anti-police activists will never agree to it, because if they agree to it, it goes against their basic, broader narrative that they want to abolish all police officers. Let's see. Officer Blue Gun, Covenant showed why we need warriors in law enforcement. Yeah, absolutely, Officer Blue Gun. There is still a place for the warrior culture in policing, and there's an entire movement out there who is trying to kill the warrior culture in policing and make it a bunch of social workers, which there is a place for social workers. I'm not saying anything bad about social workers. There is a place for social workers, but there's also a place for the warrior culture as well. Let's see. Maxo, defunding the police doesn't sound like a good good idea. Absolutely. Michael Poe, with this being a religious-based institution, I believe there is a whole bunch of questions. Michael Poe, interesting. I'm not sure exactly where you're going with that, but put in the chat. I'm curious. I'm curious about that. I'm not sure if it's just because I'm not, I say it's better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war. So I think it's something to keep in mind. And Michael Poe, so I'm not sure how this has to do with it being a religious school, except that the shooter did previously go to the school. There was some connection there. So we haven't heard a whole lot of details about that yet. But yeah, and the FBI actually haven't the FBI hasn't released the manifesto yet. Yeah, I mean, they probably won't release the manifesto until 2045 because the shooter falls into a victimized, marginalized group that they don't have any interest in talking about. Let's see. Compliments, Michael Poe. Compliments for the professional, precise textbook example of protecting the public at large. Absolutely. Yeah, this was a great response from police officers. Sergeant George, I'm looking forward to hearing what led up to the incident. Sergeant George, I'm interested in that too. I mean, we want to know why these things happen. And when you have a person who does this, obviously they are mentally ill. There's something else going on because no normal person does this. But yeah, I think we're all interested and we deserve those answers. All right, the next case that I'm going to talk about, and listen, this is the best way that I can describe it is conflicted. I am conflicted about this case. I still don't know what my final thoughts are on it. So before I do this show, I always look at these cases and I research, and kind of as I'm going through the week, I always write things down and I go, okay, well, this is what I think about this case. Here's what I think about that case. This case, I don't know. I don't know what my final conclusion is yet. So maybe you all can help me out with this one. So the body cam footage of this actually just came out yesterday. So in my defense, I haven't had a whole lot of time to look through it. But the case that I'm talking about, it's an individual named Delenio Martin. He was 17 years old, and this officer-involved shooting on it occurred on March 28th of this year in the D.C. area. So this happened with the D.C. police and the National Parks Police. So here's what happened. So there was a call for service in the D.C. area that D.C. Metro Police were dispatched to, and the call was a suspicious vehicle. And this is in the middle of the day. I think it's the morning. It's definitely light outside. So the call was a suspicious vehicle that was in a residential area. So police officers, so it's, again, this isn't like they're stopping people for nonsense and something happens, or they're stopping people for jaywalking or something silly. No, it's a call about a suspicious car. Again, police have to go. Doesn't mean that the person did anything wrong or there's a crime, but the police have to respond. So police get there and they see a couple things. They see the car in question. They see that it's running, and they see that there's an individual who ends up being Mr. Martin, the 17-year-old kid. That ends up seeing Mr. Martin is in the driver's seat of the car, and he appears to be sleeping. So police officers do what they should. They shouldn't just knock on the window and, all crazy, try to wake people up. No, they're there. They should try to get a little more information. So police do that. They run the license plate, and they find out the license plate comes back that this is a stolen car. So now they have a felony. So whether it's auto theft or being in possession of a stolen vehicle, both of those are felonies. Whichever different jurisdictions charge different things for these types of crimes. Either way, being in the driver's seat of a stolen car is going to be a felony pretty much in any jurisdiction, including in DC. So now the police officers have probable cause to arrest the driver for felony. So the police officers can do a couple things. They can just immediately knock on the door and the window and start screaming and yelling at the driver, but they didn't do that to their credit. What the police officers did is they called for backup. They called for more resources, which is a good thing because, again, the individual is still sleeping, so he's not going to sleep forever, right? But, they have a little bit of time, so they use that time on their side, which is the right thing for police officers to do. So they called for backup. The U.S. National Park Police, they showed up as well. And, I'll be honest, I didn't know a whole lot about the U.S. National Park Service Police. I assume that they just kind of guarded the memorials and all that kind of stuff. But if you ever listen to Street Cop Training, or if you've been to Street Cop Training or the Street Cop Training podcast, Dennis, the guy who runs it, he actually was part of the U.S. Park Police. And listen to his podcast. What he talks about is that no, they're actually like a proactive law enforcement agency, especially around the especially around the DC area, that they respond to calls for service, that they do traffic stops. I think they even arrested Bruce Springsteen for drunk driving in like 2021. So it's more than I thought. I think that was in the New York area. So that's more than I thought that the U.S. Parks Police would do, but that's just some context, and that's something I learned recently that I didn't know about. So DC Metro Police call for backup. U.S. Parks police officers show up, and essentially they come up with a plan. So some of this is on body camera video, but at least I haven't been able to find all of the body camera video about it yet. But essentially they have a conversation, and during the conversation, one of the officers is talking, and they're talking to someone who has stripes. So we know there's at least one sergeant that's on scene. As they're talking, they're talking about, well, how are we going to do this? What's the plan? What's the plan going forward? And Officer Blue Gun, I'm going to get there in a second. You are 100% dead on. So they think about, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? One of the individuals says to the sergeant to something to the effect of, don't get caught up in the car. Well, yeah, that's a common thing, and I'm just going to address that really quick. So most of the time, it's a bad idea for police officers to put their hands, their arms, any part of their body inside of a vehicle that might move, flee, or accelerate. A couple reasons. One, because that's extremely dangerous. A police officer could get run over. You could get thrown from a car. You could get hung up in a car. We've had cases like this happen before. So typically there are policies and stuff that are in place where police officers, through training or policy, that they're not supposed to do that. Now, here's where, a lot of times it's a good idea. So the way that I've done this, and the way the agency that I was with, the way that we would handle something like this is, and this isn't always possible, but if possible, and this is the only time I'm going to say that there's a reasonable exception to sticking a part of your body inside of the vehicle, is to try to turn the vehicle off. Because if the individual is sleeping, if there's a way to turn the vehicle off, to take the keys out of the car, to do something like that, to disable the vehicle, it'll essentially make the entire situation safer for both the individual, the driver, and for police officers. Now, that's not always possible. And again, I know I sound like I'm contradicting myself, that police officers shouldn't put any part of their body in a vehicle. So at least for me, the only reasonable time I could see is if it's in an effort, while an individual seems like they're sleeping pretty hard, to turn the vehicle off or take the key so the driver can't accelerate forward with the car. Well, okay, so one of the plans that they have, and here's where this doesn't make any sense. Here's where this doesn't break down, and Officer Blue Gun was going here as well. One of the things that absolutely makes no sense about this. So first of all, let's talk about what does make sense. So here are the kinds of things that I would think that police officers would do, have done, that I've seen done in a situation like this. Okay, you have an individual who is, you have probable cause that he committed a felony. So you also, and the main thing is, you don't want the car to drive away. The car's still running. He's in the driver's seat. It'd be very easy for him to just put the car in drive and drive away. So you want to avoid that. So typically what police departments do, if you have the equipment, and it would be crazy to me that large police departments like the U.S. Parks Police and also the D.C. Metro Police don't have this equipment. So this would make no sense for them not to have it. But if anyone is local there, please go ahead and correct me if I'm wrong, is you put spike strips. So you put either stop sticks or spike strips or something underneath one of the tires. That way, if he does flee, if the vehicle does accelerate forward, he's not going to get very far, right? Or what I have seen some other police departments do, we've done this in the past, isn't ideal, but again, if the person is passed out sleeping, they're not going to see you do this, maybe pull a police car in front, nose to nose. So it would be difficult to go forward. Also, police departments have technology called Star Chase, which is essentially a GPS tracker. So you can put a GPS tracker, the Star Chase, you can put that on the vehicle as well. That way, if the vehicle does flee, well, okay, fine. We're not going to risk anybody's lives, trying to chase this thing. We know exactly where it is because we've got a GPS on it. Okay. So one of the plans that they came up with, and again, this makes absolutely zero sense, is the rear passenger side window of the car. It wasn't a window, it was like plastic. It was like plastic that was over the window. So one of the things that they decided to do is they cut out the plastic and they entered the vehicle through that way. So that's how they unlocked the vehicle and they got into the back seat. And again, this is what's strange. So for whatever reason, one officer was by the rear passenger side of the car and other officers were by the driver's side of the car, which is reasonable. Almost simultaneously, so at the same time, a police officer cut open the rear passenger side window, opened the door, and got into the back seat of the car. I mean, again, this is nuts. This makes absolutely no sense. There's no training that would indicate you should do this. I've never seen this in studying police tactics, and for over 20 years, I've never seen this before. The officer willingly and purposefully gets into the back seat. At the same time, officers open the driver's side door and they confront the driver. They wake him up. They try to grab his arms and get him into custody. That's all normal and reasonable. Well, predictably, you can see what happens. The driver accelerates. The police officers are unsuccessful in getting him out of the car because, again, it's very, even if police officers are trying to drag you out of a car, it's very easy to just put the car and drive and just go forward. Like, I mean, that isn't hard to do, which is one of the reasons why you want to try to turn off the car if possible. So the officer, or the individual, Mr. Martin, he accelerates forward. He's woken up. He accelerates forward. One of the police officers who was by the driver's side door kind of gets hit by the car and is kind of thrown, but he doesn't have any injuries. And now you have an officer who's in the back seat of the car. It's moving. He's essentially being kidnapped, which is absolutely crazy. So he has his body camera rolling for all of this. So he's telling the guy, stop the car, stop the car. At one time he says something like, hey bro, like, or hey man, like just let me out of the car. Stop the car, let me out. The driver, he's not letting him out. He's driving, he's accelerating. And then the police officer says, if you don't stop the car, I'll shoot. He gives that warning. Less than a second later, the officer from the back seat of the car shoots Mr. Martin multiple times in the back and kills him. The car crashes into a house. No one was injured in the house, and the driver ends up dying. So obviously, this is extremely problematic. And here's my heartache with it. So I think everyone kind of feels the same way. Let's talk about where we probably agree. I think most of us agree, and Officer Blue Gun mentioned it here a second ago. Here's the problem, is that there is absolutely no reason for that police officer to go into the back seat of the car. Like, it literally doesn't make any sense. There's no justification. I've racked my brain trying to think about it. There's no training, there's no education, there's no best practices. This is literally the opposite of that. If most police departments have training and policy that tell officers, hey, don't even put your hands inside of a car that might move, why would you put your entire body? So this is a very predictable thing that would happen. I can't say it enough how absolutely insane it is. So we have a tactical problem, but now we have a tactical problem. So here's my question about this. And this is the part of the body camera that's missing, or at least I haven't been able to find, is the few minutes in between when they come up with the plan to where they execute the plan. Because on body camera, we have executing the plan. So who came up with this plan? So here's where I'm going with this. There was a sergeant on scene. So either this was the sergeant's idea or the sergeant approved it. Now, again, so now you have an officer who goes into the back seat. And again, this is the part that we don't know. What if if there was a plan, or the sergeant told the officer, this is what you're going to do? This is chain of command. So my question is it the fault of the individual officer, or is it the fault of the first line supervisor, the sergeant who was on scene who allowed this to happen? Well, I think there's probably blame going both ways. And there are a lot of people saying that the police officer should be charged criminally. Well, okay, and just so you know, the Department of Justice did open up a civil rights investigation on this case as well. So hear me out. So even if you think, and I'm not saying I do, but even if someone thinks, okay, the police officer should be charged, this was criminal act by the police officer, even if that's the case, well, does that change if the police officer is told to do it by a supervisor? So now we get into, essentially what's officer-induced jeopardy, and that's really what the issue is here. So the issue is, here's the best example that I can give about what officer-induced jeopardy is. And so let's say there's a car that's speeding away from police, or a car is going 30 miles an hour down the street. A police officer who's on the side of the road jumps purposely in front of the moving car and then starts shooting at the driver. And the excuse is, well, I was about to be run over by the driver. Well, most police departments and district attorneys are going to say, hang on. This car was moving. You jumped in front of it and then started shooting at the driver, and it was unnecessary for you to do that. That is not within policy. That is not within the law. So now that's different than obviously a police officer who's standing on the side of the road and a vehicle veers off the road towards the officer. The officer has nowhere to go, and through no fault of their own, and they have to shoot or they do shoot at the driver to save their life. So those are two different things. So were the actions of the officer so negligent or so reckless that criminal charges would be expected for the officer? So we have that. And the last thing that I'm going to say about this, and this is what I'm curious about what people think. So let's all acknowledge. So where I went with all that is let's acknowledge everything was problematic about how the officer ended up in the back. So no matter if it was the officer's fault, if it was a sergeant's fault, whoever it was a fault of all the police officers on scene, I don't know. But either way, the officer is in the back seat of a car that's moving, and the driver isn't stopping. Is that a deadly force situation? Well, let's talk about it, yes or no. So in talking about, well, it is a deadly force situation because essentially the officer is being kidnapped. He's not able to move. He's in this car. And an argument could be made that, okay, if we acknowledge this is a deadly force situation, what would the best thing to do be? Are you going to wait until the guy crashes the car intentionally? Are you going to wait until the driver gets on the highway and is doing 100 miles an hour instead of doing 20 miles an hour in a residential area? Well, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense because then if you do have to use force or get into a shooting or anything like that, it's much dangerous for the other traffic and pedestrians and everybody else. So also, and if someone is driving a car, think about it this way. If someone is driving a car, okay, and because what I've heard a lot is, well, yeah, but then the car crashed and they could have hurt and killed anyone. Well, that's absolutely true. But think about it this way. Either you're saying the police officer has to just sit there and take it. And if that's your position, okay, fine. I'm good for you to hear it out. The police officer has to sit there and take it and not use any force or do anything and just kind of see where this person ends up taking them and they just have to deal with it. So if that's your position, I'm good with it. I like to hear that argument. But if your position is no, the police officer has to do something, well, either way, the car is going to crash. Whether it's the officer grabs the individual's arms, whether the officer grabs the steering wheel himself, whether the officer uses a taser, punches the driver in the face. I mean, either way, the car is going to crash. So it's pretty much inevitable, in my opinion, that when something like this happens, if the driver doesn't stop on his own pretty quickly, either way, this is going to end in some kind of a crash. And again, so if you're the police officer in that situation or just someone looking at this situation from the outside, do you want that crash to be in a residential area where the driver is going 20 miles an hour and there's not many people around? Or would you want the crash to be when the driver's going 100 miles an hour down the highway? So clearly, I think the slower speeds, the quicker that you can end this, the absolute better. So, and the thing is so, police officers can use deadly force, really all force, but in this case, police officers can use deadly force if it is objectively reasonable. That's right from Graham versus Connor. So what that means is in the moment, would a reasonable police officer in a similar set of circumstances have a reasonable belief that they are at risk of great bodily injury or death? If the answer to that is yes, so not what happened 10 minutes before, well, like in the moment, at that exact moment. So you basically take the exact moment that the officer used force and you put bookends around it. This is when you're looking at this case legally under Graham versus Connor, and you put bookends around it at the exact moment that the trigger was pulled. Was it objectively reasonable? And that's how this case is looked at when it comes to whether or not the shooting was lawful or not. I think if we just ask that question, again, because either you're saying that the police officer has to sit there and just take it and deal with it, or the police officer can use force in order to stop the situation. And, if you say the police officer just has to take it, again, I'd really like to hear that argument. But you put bookends around the time that the force was actually used and the reason it was used. Is that objectively reasonable? I think that question is probably yes. Because otherwise you're saying, well, police officer just has to sit there and let the guy crash the car at 100 miles an hour, and that officer doesn't have a right to defend his own life. Like, that isn't a thing. So there's no law that says that. So I think it's probably that there probably should be no criminal charges against the police officer for the actual shooting. Now, I could change my mind, but it's kind of what I think. I kind of want to see the rest of the body camera footage, but that's kind of where I'm leading, that in the moment, yes, this was objectively reasonable, but everything before it was problematic. How he ended up in the back seat, but that, to me, that seems like that is a violation of training. That's a violation of policy. That's possible discipline from the department, maybe discipline or getting your license revoked or suspended as a police officer. Definitely a civil lawsuit from the side of the family. So I could change my mind. I reserve the right to change my mind on this if there is more information. But just what I'm looking at now, I think it's probably probably objectively reasonable the moment he pulled the gun, but acknowledging everything else before is problematic. But the thing is, police not using the best tactics, or police making a mistake, or police not using the best training, that's not criminal. Like that's not a criminal action by the police officer, that not using your training or remembering your training or making a boneheaded decision in a dynamic situation trying to arrest someone in who's committing a felony. No, like that isn't criminal. You know what is criminal? Stealing a car, not listening to police officers, and then driving away with a police officer in the car, not letting them out. So all of that is criminal. So maybe we could look at it this way. Okay, before the shooting happened, the police officer made tactical mistakes. But Mr. Martin committed multiple felonies, okay? Let's call that a wash, okay? So if we call that a wash, is it objectively reasonable in the moment? That's not how the law looks at it, of course, but, just kind of talking through this. Is it objectively reasonable in the moment? Probably. All right, so let's see. Let's see if we have any questions on this. Steve Ladner says, I shot an unarmed man in the back. Steve and I go back and forth all the time. Well, Steve, that is incredibly ridiculous and dishonest. So an unarmed man in the back who was driving a car and had kidnapped the police officer. So I guess here's my point with all this. Steve, if you're saying that, so that means that you would have to say that there's no circumstance, Steve, that a vehicle is a weapon, which it absolutely is. It makes no sense. So again, Steve, here's what I'm asking. I know this is a lot to ask, that if you think the police officer just has to take it and has to sit there and can't do anything to defend themselves, I'm good with that position. I don't agree, but I'm good with that position. But I at least ask, and again, I know this is a lot, I at least ask that you're honest and you use the facts that we have, not some made up facts by saying, it was an unarmed person who was in a car, and it was an unarmed person, the police shot him in the back for no reason. Like, that's ridiculous, that's silly, that's almost a juvenile level of trolling that we shouldn't even address. So be honest about the facts and tell me why you think that, Steve. Let's see. The Officer Blue Gun agrees. That's an interesting simplification, Steve. Yeah. So Bruce says, I was thinking the same thing. Let's see. Officer Blue Gun, the family will win a civil lawsuit because of the bad tactics. Officer Blue Gun, that's exactly what I think. Yeah. This is a civil case. This is a Breonna Taylor level civil case. And that's probably the case that it best representative of is, like, yes, there were probably some tactical errors beforehand, but in the moment, like, it was reasonable for the officer to pull the trigger. That means not criminal, but huge civil lawsuit, and police officers probably will lose their jobs or be disciplined severely. That's my guess as to what happens to this. Zach says, this guy looks similar to Ted Cruz. Okay, all right. Well, I don't know what to tell you about that. There's nothing I can do about that. I guess it's the purple shirt. Let's see. Sergeant George says, the fact that the police officer got in the back seat of a suspect's car is a clear violation of training and protocol. Sergeant George, I agree 100%. I did a video on this on TikTok, and someone who obviously has some law enforcement experience, because they were citing different training and stuff like that, where, at least it made me seem like they had some law enforcement experience. They asked me the question, they said, what training does this violate? And I didn't even know how to answer that. So, I mean, because it's such nonsense. It's such just beyond anything common sense that a police officer would do. And again, I know there are certain departments that do have training to not put any part of your body inside of a car when it's moving, you think it's going to flee. You're right. There probably isn't something in policy that says, hey, don't put yourself in the backseat of a car because you could get kidnapped. So the policy probably doesn't extend that far, because no one reasonable who's making a policy would ever think a police officer would do this. Garrett says, maybe there's an argument for using more de-escalation tactics. Could be prudent, but really it's a weird situation in the first place. Garrett, yeah, no, it is. And so de-escalation, Garrett, I'm not really sure what they can do, because you have an individual who's sleeping. So it's not like, you could talk someone. I mean, someone is being awoken by police. They're not expecting it. And it's almost a natural reaction just to try to run. Even if you're not a bad person, even if you're just a heavy sleeper and, you're woken up, maybe you're a little intoxicated. That's kind of a common thing with people who fall asleep in cars. And you wake up and you have a bunch of people screaming and yelling at you. Even maybe in that second before you realize it's police, a natural reaction might be just to try to leave and get out of the situation. situation. So, so I don't know how much de-escalation, Garrett, would have worked, but different tactics for sure. Like I talked about at the beginning of this, like, a reasonable thing would be to put spike strips or a spike belt underneath underneath the tires, so that if or the Star Chase GPS, that way if the car does run, it isn't a big deal. And one of the things, and here's again what doesn't make any sense, and that's why this missing body camera footage is just so relevant, because also one of the things that was on body camera footage that was put out there is one of the officers on scene before they went ahead with this boneheaded plan. One of the officers said, if he drives away, if he leaves, just let him go. If he runs, just let him go. Yes, that's the way to think about this. A stolen car, okay, fine. Yes, it's a felony, but it's not worth anybody's life. It's not worth getting into a high-speed chase over. It's not worth injuring a police officer or the driver for any of these things. So spike strips, spike belt, GPS seems like a reasonable thing. Can't believe that they thought that was this was a better idea than that. Michael Poe says, sorry, I'm still trying to wrap my head around anyone jumping into a vehicle under these circumstances, especially not the police officer. Yeah, I agree. So there was one other case. There was Steve Ladner, why do you think the body camera footage is missing? So Steve, I don't know. And so Steve, I'm going to be as honest as I could be on this, is I don't know if it's missing or if I just wasn't able to find it. So I think if you go to, my understanding is that the body camera footage has been put out. But when I Googled it, all that would come up is the different news sites, CNN and Fox News and MSNBC, who had different versions of the body camera footage. And that's all I was able to find because it just came out yesterday. I haven't had a lot of time. My guess, Steve, is that if you go right to the website, to either the National Park Police or to the DC Metro Police, that they probably have the full body camera footage there. So I think if anything, it's operator error and I just haven't been able to find it. My guess is it's out. I could be wrong, but that's my guess because the damaging part of this, I mean, it's already out, how silly all of this was. Let's see. Officer, last comment. Officer Blue Gun, I wonder if the officer climbing in the back was actually not part of the plan and he went and bit rogue. Still not why not box the vehicle in. Yeah, I agree 100%. Again, this doesn't make any sense. So the missing body camera footage, maybe that's misleading. I haven't been able to find it. So if anybody does find it, why don't you put it in the comments later on? Otherwise, I am going to search for it this weekend. Okay, next case that I want to talk about, and this is a really strange case. It's out of LAPD, and this is where the police officers were essentially doxxed. What that means is that their personal information was put out there. And this is a really strange, with a lot of lawsuits going different ways. And on this one, I'm actually going to take the side of an anti-police activist, which is something I almost never do. So here's what happened. So there's an individual, he's a journalist named Ben Camacho, and he's one of these people who does public record requests and tries to get different records, and he puts them out there on YouTube and stuff. And who cares? I mean, that's how you want to spend your time. Spend your time that way. It's a legal, perfectly legal thing to do. So in one of his records requests, by mistake, employees with the LA City Attorney's Office gave him a lot more than he asked for. So obviously this was a mistake by the employees of the city of LA. What they gave this journalist, Ben Camacho, what they gave him was essentially the names, personal information, and pictures of 9,000 LAPD officers. And a lot of those officers were undercover officers. So what Ben Camacho, they also gave email addresses as well. What Ben Camacho did is he then gave that information to an anti-police group called LAPD Spying Coalition. So he gave that information to the LAPD Spying Coalition, who of course published it all online. So all of this information is online. Police officers are getting all kinds of threats. Oh, D-Dog, hello, appreciate the insight. Are you a police officer? Yeah, D-Dog, I've over 17 years experience in a police department, master's degree in criminal justice, and a law degree. So what they did is they basically put all this information out online, which is there's nothing wrong with that. So yes, of course, morally, maybe there's something wrong with that, but that isn't illegal. So what happened is, so now you have police officers who are pissed off, and police officers are pissed off, at the city for releasing the information and to the group who put it all online. But if we look at whose actual fault this is, so who had the duty to protect this information? It's not the anti-police maniacs. I mean, they're juveniles. We don't expect literally anything from them. We don't even expect them to not set buildings on fire, right? So I mean, there isn't any expectation that they're reasonable humans. But the city of LA, they were the custodians of these records. That's who I think is at fault in this. So there's a couple different lawsuits going back and forth. So the city of LA actually sued Ben Camacho and the LAPD spying coalition group who put it online and sued them. And what they're asking for in their lawsuit is to return the documents and the thumb drive to the police department, and then to take it down off the internet. Again, I don't always think that people who so the Ben Camacho, the journalist, he did say something funny in response to the news. He said, "That's not how the internet works." But so I mean, he's like, I can give you back the stuff, but this stuff is out there. It's out there. It's in the internet. It's not going anywhere. So so the lawsuit from the city of LA is a little silly because it's not going to accomplish anything. Even if the manila envelope that had the information in the thumb drive, even if this guy gives it back and the website even if this is taken off the website, it's been shared, probably hundreds of thousands of times by different people. So the information isn't going anywhere. So again, it's a little silly for the city of LA. So, anything when it comes to the journalists and First Amendment, and again, this is a case where, because I'm a First Amendment absolutist, I can disagree just on a moral level and just on every level. I can disagree and don't think it's a good idea that the journalist and the LAPD spying coalition did this, but I absolutely 100% to acknowledge it's their right to do it. So there's really nothing the city of LA can do. What this seems like to me is that the city of LA is preemptively trying to prevent a lawsuit or against themselves. Because if I was a police officer with the Los Angeles Police Department and my information was put out there, I would, as the union or as the LAPD officers, I think they should be mad at the city. They should file lawsuits and all kinds of things against the city. My guess is that there is a union contract, collective bargaining contract, that the police officers union has with the city of LA that specifically prohibits the city of LA from doing this. My guess is it's a violation of that contract. So I think that's where the legal fight, and again, legal fights don't always make sense, but I think that's where the legal fight should be. Should be the police officers suing the city. I think the city is trying to take some of the heat off themselves by suing these journalists. But again, the journalists were given this information by the city that they really can do whatever they want with it. So yeah, that's going to be an interesting case to follow going forward. Garrett says, wonder though if they could hold Ben liable for years down the road in case something does occur to the release of information. Garrett, no, I don't think so. Like I said, he was given information from the city and he gave it to someone else. He actually, yes, it does depend on California laws when it comes to protecting personal information. But typically a journalist, doesn't have any duty to protect the private information of public employees. The city has that duty. So there could be ethics when it comes to journalism. But again, it's not like he works for the New York Times or the LA Times. They could try to get him fired. I think he just works for himself, and this should be a first, even though it's idiotic, it should be a First Amendment protected activity. So we can all agree it's a bad idea. He shouldn't have done it, but I don't see anything that he did that was illegal. Bad idea, yes. Illegal, no. And should it be illegal? No, it probably shouldn't be illegal. If the city, the protections have to be there from the city. It's just kind of like with the HIPAA law, the HIPAA law with medical information. Well, it's not up to anyone who obtains the information. It's up to the medical facility, the doctors. They are the ones who it's their job to protect that information. So this is absolutely crazy that just happened. Let's see. Bruce says, you just gave me a good play on California. Change it to can you afford to? Exactly. Let's see. Sergeant George says, the only thing I can think of off the top of my head is espionage, unlike any other. Like I said, I don't think there's certainly not going to be any criminal charges against the journalist. So no one's even thinking criminal charges. But essentially, like I said, even if the city of LA gets what they're asking for in their lawsuit, so let's say the city of LA wins the lawsuit, all they're asking for is the manila envelope back that had the documents and the thumb drive and the website taken down. Even if they win, even if they get a judge to say, do all of that stuff, the images are out there. They've been shared hundreds of thousands of times. It literally does nothing to take down one website when 100 more can pop up in a matter of seconds. Doesn't make any sense. So, so this this doesn't make any sense. And there's all kinds of internet archive sites. I mean, so with the website. So again, it doesn't make any sense. I think that the city of LA is really just trying to cover their bases. The mayor of LA, Karen Bass, she expressed concerns. She was asked about this a couple days ago. She didn't want to talk specifically about it. All that she would say is that she said that she hopes that this doesn't hurt recruiting new LAPD officers and then retaining the ones that they could have. This is just another blunder from LAPD management. A couple months ago, it was banning the blue line flag in city buildings, and now this. So I'm not sure why anyone would want to be an LAPD officer, and this is just part of the reason why. Another California story that I'm going to talk about here for a second, it's Ben Lee. So Ben Lee was the founder of Cash App. He's also the chief technology officer of Square. He was a Bay Area person, like a lot of these tech giants are. He had moved from the Bay Area to Florida a while back. He recently went back to San Francisco for a business meeting, and tragically, shockingly, he was stabbed to death. Last week, he was stabbed to death in San Francisco, walking around at about 2:30 in the morning. Condolences have come across from all kinds of famous people like Elon Musk. I mean, everyone has put out their condolences because they all knew Ben Lee. And, it's one of those things where, we talk about how dangerous and how violent some of these cities are, and it's like this is a perfect example of that. Someone who doesn't have a violent history, who's just a normal business person who was there for business, is stabbed to death, probably by a maniac. The police don't have anybody in custody yet. But in some of the things that people were talking about this case is it's not just the death of the one person, but it's also just the violence in general in San Francisco. This is actually the 12th homicide of the year for San Francisco. That's 20% higher than last year at this point. This relates to a book I just finished reading. So I actually just finished a couple weeks ago a book called San Francisco, written by Michael Schellenberger. He was one of the ones who did the Twitter files. But basically, he talked about the root causes, specifically in San Francisco. He talked about the root causes of homelessness and addiction and crime, and essentially how these progressive policies and all these progressive solutions, they failed everyone. This is just an example of that. So thoughts out to Ben Lee's family. He had a couple of young kids. It's unbelievably sad. And this is there are predictable things that happen when bad public policy is put in place. Okay, here's this next story that is strange. So everyone has seen these YouTube videos where people go around and they pull pranks on people in public. If fuck around and find out was a story, it's this one. So there's a YouTuber who I had never heard of before, but his name is Tanner Cook, and he runs a YouTube channel called Classified Goons. Essentially what he does, I think he has like 40,000 subscribers, more than I thought he would have, but he has about 40,000 subscribers on YouTube. And what he does is he goes around, he pulls pranks on people, he records it and stuff like that. A lot of them are harmless, a lot of them are just annoying. So, if, for example, in one of his prior pranks, he went behind the counter at McDonald's and essentially surprised and scared the workers there. They ended up calling police. So he does stuff like that. He has his buddy record. What he decided to do is he went out to the mall in the Washington, D.C. area last week, and he was pulling one of his pranks. He contacted an individual who he didn't know before named Alan Colley. Alan Colley does have a violent history. Nothing crazy, but he has been arrested for battery a couple different times in the last decade. So Alan, Mr. Cook contacted Mr. Colley. The YouTuber contacted Mr. Colley in the food court while Mr. Colley was there trying to pick up a DoorDash order. So now just imagine this. You're doing your thing. You're trying to pick up a DoorDash order, probably just trying to make some extra money on the weekend. And all of a sudden, you're approached by someone who's trying to film a YouTube video, which is just not everybody wants to be a character in your video. So what happened during this interaction is that during the interaction, Mr. Cook persisted. He was trying to get Mr. Colley just to do some goofy things on video. Mr. Colley wasn't having it. He told him he didn't want anything to do with him. He walked away. But the YouTuber was following him and kind of pestering him. Eventually, I mean, these things only last for so long. So eventually, Mr. Colley pulled out a handgun after he was being followed and pestered. He pulled out a handgun and he shot the YouTuber in the stomach. The YouTuber, Mr. Cook, he did not suffer life-threatening injuries. I think he had to have his gallbladder removed, so he will survive. He's done a couple interviews and stuff like that, so non-life-threatening injuries. Mr. Colley was charged with aggravated malicious wounding and using a firearm inside of a building. The sheriff's department also said that Mr. Cook may also be facing harassment charges because this was captured on video. So Mr. Cook did have one of his buddies record this while this was happening. So apparently the sheriff's department investigating this does have the video of the incident, and they have they said that it's possible that Mr. Cook may face harassment charges. And you know what? Really, the only surprising thing about this case is that this is the first time this has happened. I mean, it's just like, don't bother people. Not everybody wants to be a character in your idiotic video. All right, let's see if we have any comments on that. Let's see. Officer Blue Gun, I'm going to watch his subscriber count. May need to get shot to get more subs. Yeah, Officer Blue Gun, my guess, if he had 40,000 subs when this happened, it's only going to go up. Yeah. And, you know, we should be saying a lot of these pranks are actually demonetized by YouTube with their new policies in order to try to discourage this kind of thing. And I have no issue with people making funny videos, but it's one of those things where it's like some people, a lot of people, we just want to be left alone. Don't bug us in public. And it's one of those things where it's like if you're going to bug someone in public, if it's clear they don't want to be a part of it, just leave them alone. This is a good example of that. And another important part of this story is I just want to put out there, it's unclear if the DoorDash order was actually delivered on time. Okay, so the last case I'm going to talk about, and this is kind of a teaser because, again, this came in just last night is when we heard about this case, so we don't have body camera footage. We just have a basic kind of a statement from the police department, but this is a tragic case, and it seems like there's going to be a lot of problems and issues with this case once we get the body camera footage. So let me just set it up, and hopefully next week we'll have some more information on it. But this happened in Farmington, New Mexico. Farmington, New Mexico is a town of about 50,000 people or so, up in the Four Corners area. Probably about 45 minutes from Durango, Colorado, but it's Farmington, New Mexico. So there was a domestic violence. The way I can describe the town, it's kind of like a blue-collar oil field workers. Tourists go there and stuff like that because a lot of northern New Mexico looks like Colorado, so it's actually pretty nice. So there was a domestic violence call in Farmington, New Mexico. Police officers respond to the domestic violence call. They knock on the door. The problem is it's the wrong door. They're at the wrong house, and obviously police officers don't realize it. So at this point, we don't know. And I'm going to say we don't know. We can assume, but we don't know if police officers were just given the wrong address by the dispatcher, or if the caller gave the wrong address, or if police officers had the right address, they just went to the wrong house. So all we know is that police officers went to the wrong house, but exactly how that happened, we don't know. I'm just putting it out there that there could be a couple different possibilities as to why police officers were at the wrong house. Either way, this is the wrong house. These people did not call police. No one called police on them. They were not involved in a domestic dispute. So police officers knock on the door. No one answers the door. No one answers the door at first. Police officers kind of walk back to their car. They're kind of standing in front of the house. They have they contact dispatch, and they go up and they knock on the door again. It's reported at that point the homeowner of the house, a male, he comes to the front door and he's holding the gun, which a lot of people in New Mexico have firearms. That's not an unusual thing. So he enters the house with a firearm. At this point, we don't know if know if he just if he points the gun, if he threatens the police officers. We don't even know if he knows that it is police officers or if he thinks someone's just harassing him, knocking at his door. I mean, we don't know at this point. But what happens is he does come out armed with a firearm. We know that police officers do engage, do fire at him. They end up killing him. His name is Mr. Dotson. The chief of Farmington Police, Steve Hebby, said, "I'm just heartbroken. Mr. Dotson was not the subject of the call." That's from the Farmington police chief. The Mr. Dotson was killed by police officers. During this, Mr. Dotson's wife came out as well. She was armed. She also started firing at police officers. Her and police officers exchanged gunfire. As far as I'm aware at this point, she and the police officers weren't injured. And it's also being reported that as soon as she realized or was told or realized that it was police officers, she stopped firing. And she put her gun down and cooperated with police officers. So again, we don't have a lot of information. This just came out last night. Obviously, we're interested to see what the body camera footage says. We want to know what the police officers were told. We want to know if they announced themselves. These are just some of the questions that I would think of that we need to ask about this particular case. But so the statement that I just said, that's coming from the Farmington Police Department. So you wouldn't think that the Farmington Police Department would have any incentive to say anything positive in the light of Mr. and Mrs. Dotson, right? And even the Farmington police chief says that as soon as the wife realized it was police officers, she stopped firing. So what that leads me to believe is that it seems reasonable that Mr. and Mrs. Dotson didn't know that it was police officers. So again, how this all occurred, we're not sure, but that's kind of a teaser for next week. I should just say that the New Mexico State Police is the lead agency investigating this officer-involved shooting as part of the multi-agency task force. So we will stay on top of that. If there is any more information on that case, we'll definitely put it in there. Definitely put it on the show next week, and that's gonna be our show today. So I want to thank everybody. I want to thank one more comment because this is a good one. Bruce says, "Well, imagine to be a cop and be told you just shot an innocent person like that. I would not want to live with that." No, that's we know that's. I mean, hearts have to go out to the person who wasn't the subject of the call, ended up dying. But yeah, this obviously isn't easy for a police officer. No police officer says, "You know what I want to do? I'm going to go to work and I'm going to kill an innocent person for no reason who isn't the subject of a call for service." Like, that's not a thing that happens. So yeah, this is a tragedy all around. Again, I want to thank everyone for being part of our live show. I hope everyone has a great holiday. If you haven't already, please go ahead and subscribe to Cops and Cons TV. Share it with your friends and family. And again, my name is Daniel. You can go ahead and follow me over at Police Law News as well. And thank you. Have a good weekend.